Shalom everyone and welcome to Busisiwe, which is Baruch in Hebrew. My name is Abigail. We continue with the series which we started last week entitled Flee Babel. And last week we started with the teaching about Nimrod because you cannot understand Babel as a city without knowing who was the first king of Babel and what is the spirit of that first king. That first king then being Nimrod. And what is the spirit of Nimrod? How do we identify it in our times? Because when the scripture speaks about fleeing Babel, it's not only talking about the physical location of Babel, but it's also speak about the spirit of Babel, which we have to flee both anyway. The physical location, but as well as the spiritual aspect of it. You might flee the physical location but go to another place where the same spirit still operates. Hence we have to flee both and understand both. As we continue in today's teaching, we're looking at a mighty one. You would recall that when we were going through the teaching last week about Nimrod, we identified, we noticed that it said in the book of Barashith, otherwise known as Genesis chapter 10 verse 8 as well as chapter 10 verse 10, it said that Nimrod began to be a mighty one in the earth. So we were examining as to what does it mean for an individual to be a mighty one. And that was expanded further in the book of Yahuah, chapter 7, from verse 43 to verse 47. The book of Yahuah, chapter 7, from verse 43 to 47. There we then saw that that he had power over all human beings on earth, over all the sons of men. He had power over them. So one can associate a mighty one with control, with power. So now in today's teaching specifically, we're looking at a mighty one in a form of money, or otherwise you could put it as, today we'll be looking at money as a mighty one. I'm sure most of you have never considered a possibility or even thinking that money can be a mighty one, but it is a mighty one, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be also focusing on the book of Shamut, otherwise known as Exodus, from verse 20. This is where we find the 10 commandments. And the first commandment, which is on verse 3, it says, Yahuah says, "You do not make beside me mighty ones." And we explained this also last week in last week's teaching when it says that when Yahuah says, "Do not make besides me," meaning other than me. In fact, another version, it says in Shamut chapter 20 verse 3, it says, "You have no other mighty ones against my face," which is before me. Another version will say before me. So now it's looking at a situation where there is a competition, knowingly or unknowingly, competition in the sense as who do you seek first, who do you go to first. And that's why Yahuah says, do not make mighty ones beside me. He means what? He says, do not make mighty ones before me, or other than me, or in front of me, or prioritizing them as opposed to me. So anything that takes the place of Yahuah, as in that you prioritize, that becomes your mighty one. Anything that is your source, anything that you run to, that becomes mighty one. And you find that most people, again, knowingly or unknowingly, they actually go to Yah as a last resort, not as the first option. When things are not working out, then they be going to him and says, help me with this, or guide me on this particular matter. He says, do not make before me, other than me, except me, beside me, mighty ones. Now, why am I saying that money is a mighty one? This is expanded further in the very same chapter of Shamut, or Exodus chapter 20. If you just go down to verse 23, verse 23 then amplifies or clarifies verse 3. Verse 3 just said, do not make beside me mighty ones. But verse 23 then clarifies, it says, do not make beside me mighty ones of silver or of gold for yourselves. Let me just read it. Verse 23, it reads, you do not make beside me mighty ones of silver, you do not make mighty ones of gold for yourselves. So it's not even summarized. It's not just silver or gold. It says you do not make mighty ones of silver. And Yahuah repeats it again and he says, you do not make mighty ones of gold for yourselves. So we're now looking at why am I saying that money is a mighty one, when we've just read the scripture that talks about silver and gold as mighty one. This is what we'll be unpacking then today. Now, most people actually, they confuse the first commandment with the second commandment. The first commandment, it just says, which is verse 3. Remember, we're in the book of Shamut, or Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. The first commandment just says that you do not make beside me mighty ones. It ends there. There's nothing that is mentioned about worshiping them. There's nothing that is mentioned about bowing down to them. It only speaks of mighty one. But the second commandment specifically then refers to idol worship. It specifically refers to something that you serve, something that you bow down to, something that you worship. And to see the difference between the first verse and the second verse, the first commandment and the second commandment. The second commandment used the term image. It says, do not make for yourself any carved image. So then it talks about something that you carve. It even explains it further through saying that either through stones, carved stones, or carved wood, or any form of structure that you put together. Do not make that, and do not worship, do not bow down to them. That's the difference between the two. So they might sound similar, but they're very distinct. And the first one, the first commandment that refers to the mighty one, specifically speaks of money, specifically speaks of source of provision. Anything that becomes your source in terms of your livelihood. And you will see the distinction between the two as we continue. Now, these are some of the scripture references that then confirms the statement that I've just made, that money is a mighty one. And remember, in light of the additional clarity which Yahuah provided in verse 23 of Exodus chapter 20, where he then says, do not make beside me mighty ones of silver, and do not make before me any mighty ones of gold. So it's now talking about silver and gold as mighty ones. Let's look at the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, chapter 3, verse 6, You would remember that a man was begging for money at the gate of the Kadush place, and Shimon, it was the third, it was 3 p.m., which is I think the scripture will say the ninth hour. But if you convert the how that language of the ninth hour, the 12th hour, the 10th hour, the 11th hour to our times, the ninth hour would be 3 p.m. So now, Acts chapter 3, verse 6, then it reads, But Shimon said, I do not have silver and gold, but what I do possess, this I give to you. In the name of Yahuah HaMashiach of Nazareth, rise up and walk. So now, what was happening then? They are going to a time of prayer, and as it is the, as it is the ninth hour or 3 p.m. Shimon. And as they are about to enter the gate of the Kadush place, the separated place, where they pray, obviously, the house of Yahuah, this man is begging money. He was begging for alms, he was begging for money. And the currency that they were using at the time, obviously, was silver and gold. So silver and gold was money, currency to them. And now, as he's begging, he was crippled. That's another information that we get as we read earlier on the chapter of Acts, chapter 3. He was a crippled man. And then as Shimon and Shimon, otherwise known as Peter, and as they're about to enter the gate, he looked at them intently as if he's expecting obviously to get something. And that's when then Shimon, otherwise known as Peter, said, I do not have silver and gold, but what I do possess, this I give to you. In the name of Yahuah HaMashiach of Nazareth, rise up and walk. Other scriptures, it says, silver and gold have I none, but such as I have, I give unto you. So this is the first time that we're seeing silver and gold being associated with money. Remember, the scripture tells us that in the mouth of any 2 or 3 witnesses, every word shall be established. Look at this pattern, silver and gold, in Acts chapter 3, verse 6. Link it to Exodus chapter 20, verse 23, where it says, do not have other mighty ones of silver, do not have mighty ones of gold before me. Nothing was mentioned about worship, nothing was mentioned about bowing down before them. So it refers to other than me, I am your source. In fact, that's how Yahuah starts in verse 1. He says, in Shamut or Exodus chapter 20, it reads, and Yahuah spoke all these words, saying, I am your Yahuah, I am Yahuah your Yahuah, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of the house of slavery. You have no other mighty ones against my face. He's starting by saying, remember, I'm the one that delivered you. I'm the one that delivered you from the house of bondage, Mitzrayim or Egypt. Not only did I deliver you from the house of bondage, but I provided for you in the wilderness for 40 years. You had manna for 40 years, every single day, the bread of the Malakim. I provided for you I brought for you quail, that when you were tired of bread, I gave you meat. So there was no work that you were going to do in the wilderness. There was no planting or sowing or reaping that you could do. Anyway, it's in the wilderness. I provided for you. Not only did I provide for you, but I protected you. I also provided you water in the wilderness, in the desert. Water gushed out of a rock. I provided for you. So why do you want, when you now come to the promised land, to have mighty ones beside me, have other sources beside me, have other people other things that you look to as a source of provision other than me, when in the wilderness I'm the one that provided for you. Your shoes did not run out for 40 years. You wore the same shoes. Neither did they become smaller even though you were growing. They did not become smaller. The clothes that you were wearing, I kept them miraculously for you, that they were not torn off because you couldn't do the washing and hang the washing in the wilderness. Imagine such source of provision. I protected you. I became for you a pillar of fire in the night, that the wild beast, they wouldn't come to you because I was protecting you. I protected you from the scorch of the heat of the sun of the desert, of the wilderness, by becoming a cloud, a pillar of cloud by day. Why then do you look to other things for protection? Why then do you look to other people for protection? This is the cry of the Father's heart. And now I'm still looking at or explaining how we see, or we might not have seen money as a mighty one, but it is a mighty one. And these are the scriptures that actually makes us see that truly we have made money a mighty one. Now, another scripture to look at is, just ask yourself, why is it Hasatan is called the mighty one of this age? We see this in the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 4. It says that the mighty one of this age has blinded the people that from seeing and receiving the light of Yahushua HaMashiach. The word calls him the mighty one of this age. Why is he called the mighty one of this age? Now remember also the answer to that question is found in the book of Luke chapter 4 verse 5. Remember in Luke chapter 4, we see that Yahushua was, after being immersed in the river, he was then taken to the wilderness where he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and afterward he was hungry. And then Hasatan then came and tempted him. And in one of the things that he then said is found in verse 5, and it says, "And the devil, taking him up on a high mountain, showed him all the reins of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, all this authority I shall give you, and their esteem, for it has been delivered to me, and I give it to whomever I wish." So he is the mighty one of this age. Why? For he has control over all the reigns of the earth and their esteem thereof. Inasmuch as Nimrod also, when we started the first teaching, Nimrod had control and power over the entire earth, over all the sons of men. They bowed down to him, they came to him, they were under his power and under his counsel. He was their king. Now Hasatan is saying the same thing, or similar rather, to Yahushua. He says, listen, just bow down to me. I will give you all these kingdoms. I'll give you all these reigns and their esteem thereof, for it was delivered to me. Delivered to him by who? Now, he's not lying when he says it is his. He's not lying, he's not claiming when he says it is his. It truly is his. But how? There was an exchange that happened. And that exchange happened as a result of sin. When Adam and Yahuah, otherwise known as Eve, when they sinned, they relinquished the authority which Yahuah had given them when he said, have dominion over all the earth, over all the work which he had created, which was everything on earth and the birds of the sky, anything that literally Yahuah created that we can see, that is here on earth where we live in, obviously not in the Shamayim. He gave it to him and he said, have control over it, rule and subdue it. But when he then sinned and disobeyed, he then exchanged all the authority, all the power that he had to Hasatan. And that's how Hasatan then had it, as he's now saying that it was delivered to him. Let's look at another scripture again that looks at who is a mighty one. And we can see that a mighty one is someone that has power over the economies. Now look here, remember Luke chapter 4 verse 5, it says, I'm not only going to give you the reigns or the kingdoms of the earth. What's the point of giving me a kingdom that is collapsing? What's the point of giving me a government, a country that is on its knees, that has collapsed? But I'm gonna give it to you with their esteem, with all the resources, all that they have, money and natural resources, all esteem, as you would define it. I will also give it to you. I won't just give you the reins without the necessary esteem that goes with it. Mark chapter 10 verse 23 to 25. And Yahuah, looking around, said to his taught ones, how hard it is for those who have money to enter into the reign of Yahuah. Now we still linking and seeing that money is a mighty one. Another example that explains this is found in the book of Mark, chapter 23 to verse 25, when Yahuah said to his disciples or taught ones, how hard it is for those who have money to enter into the reign of Yahuah. The taught ones were astonished at his words, and Yahuah responding and said to them again, children, how hard it is for those who trust in riches to enter the reign of Yahuah. Verse 25, it is easier for a camel to enter through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the reign of Yahuah. Yahuah contextualized his statement in verse 29 that he wasn't referring to being rich or wealthy, because a lot of the time we know the scripture would happen that the scripture tells us that the rich young ruler came to Yahuah, and then he asked Yahuah, what can I do to enter the reign of the Shamayim, or the reign of or the kingdom of heaven? And Yahuah then said to him, you know the commandments. And the young man, the rich young man, responded by saying, I've kept all the commandments from the age I was small, all my years growing up. And Yahuah could not dispute that. He was right. He did, in fact, obey all the 10 commandments. But then Yahuah knew that there was something that was holding this young man, ticking the boxes by just saying, okay, I've obeyed the 10 commandments, without understanding them. It's like you're doing you are obeying the letter, not the spirit of the letter. That's the word, yeah. You are fulfilling, yes, that's right. You are fulfilling the letter, not the intent of the letter or the spirit of the letter. So then Yahuah said to him, go sell all that you have and give the proceeds from that sale to the poor. Now, he doesn't say that after selling, bring the proceeds to me. No, he doesn't. He says, sell all and then give the proceeds to the poor. Then your heart will be seeking after the heavenly matters, or the kingdom of the Shamayim. And the man, because the young man was rich, and that's when he just couldn't do it. And that's why then Yahusha then used that scenario, that context of what just happened, and by saying how hard it is for the rich to enter into the reign of the Shamayim. Now, because the context had to do with a rich person anyway, now we somehow we think that that scripture doesn't talk to us because we are not rich. There are very, very, very few people on earth that are really, really, really rich, that are wealthy. A lot of people are just living they're just below average. There are even very few that are just able to meet their needs. Most people are living on the bottom edge of the scale as far as wealth, money is concerned, or affordability is concerned. So a lot of people, when they read the scripture, they just think, it doesn't apply to me. But Yahusha explains it that don't focus on the rich text or term from the wealth mentality. And he's explaining now this in verse 29, that he's referring to a source, because then he says in verse 29, truly I say to you, let's just go back to verse 25. Verse 25, it says, it is easier for a camel to enter through it is easier for a camel to enter through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the reign of Yahuah. Yahuah contextualized the statement in verse 29 that he wasn't referring to being rich or wealthy, but that he was referring to your source. What is it that you're using? What is you're trusting as your source? And that source then becomes a mighty one. It is if then you're trusting money, then money is a mighty one, which could either also be seen as silver and gold, which is currency that one trades with. Let's read verse 29. Verse 29 says, Yahusha said, truly I say to you, there is no one who has left house or brothers or sisters or father or mother or usher or children or lands for the sake of me and the message of the kingdom, who shall not receive 100-fold now in this lifetime, houses, brothers, sisters, mothers, and children and lands with persecutions, and in the age to come everlasting. Now, verse 29 to verse 30 then explains that it's not talking to riches as in the form of wealth, but it's talking to anything that you put your trust in, whether it is your house, whether it is brothers, whether it is sisters, whether it is father, whether it is mother, whether it is your wife, whether it is your husband, whether it is your children, or your land. Now remember, land was also used very much for economic purposes. In fact, it is still used right now. If you have land, you have wealth, because then on the land you can build your house. You can build a house. You can buy a house on the land. You can rent a house on the land. The house cannot just be floating anyway. It must be on the land. For the food that we eat, it comes from the land. The vegetables, the vegetation that we eat, it comes from the plants, basically, plantation that we eat, it comes from the land. The meat that we eat, the cow and the lamb and the goat and all that, they must be grazing grass, and then from there that we can be able to eat them. So there is no economic activity without the land. That's why he's putting them all together. He then speaks about land, children, spouse, mother, father, sister, brother, anything that is you are using it as a source for your provision. That's a mighty one. But then the promise that we have in him is that if you live this as mighty one, and you look at him as mighty one, and you look at his reign, his kingdom for for your source, definitely then says in verse 30, who shall, no one who leaves houses, brothers, sisters, mother, children, and lands, obviously with persecutions, and in this age to come, everlasting, they will definitely will get more than what they lost. Yes, with persecution. Don't skip that part. It won't be easy because you're going against the tide. Be aware of that. But we are more than conquerors through Yahushua HaMashiach, for he has conquered anything that he commands us to do. He has enabled us. He knows that we're able to do. Now, living the verse in particular, verse 29 and verse 30 of Mark chapter 10, verse 29 and 30 shows that there is a living and a cleaving that must happen. You must leave houses, brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, wife, husband, children, and land for the sake of Yahushua HaMashiach, for his sake and for his message. When you do that for his sake and for his message, you will in turn be compensated, cleave to 100-fold. Because verse 30 says, who shall not receive 100-fold. So you will not just only get what you lost, or rather what you gave up, what you left, but you will get 100-fold of everything that you left as you are cleaving to him and to his message. Living how this world operates under the reign of the mighty one of this age, which is Hasatan, and cleaving to the reign of Yahuah and how he operates, because these two kingdoms operate opposite each other. The world system says you must get to increase, and Yahuah's kingdom, Yahuah's reign, says that you must give to gain. You must die to live. It's opposite in so many ways. You in the reign of Yahuah, the principle there is anyone who wants to be the greatest of all must be the servant of all. That's opposite in the world system, and that's why there is that persecution that's going to happen when you move from one kingdom to the other, because everybody else is walking this direction, or most people walk in this direction, and you are going against the tide, and people are gonna think you make yourself better. People are gonna think you are an idiot. I mean, Yahushua, when he says that if someone claps you on one hand, on one cheek, give them another cheek. That's not the world system. It's opposite to the world system. And people will say, why don't you fight back? But we know that Yahuah fights our battles. And the way it tells us that vengeance is his. We don't have to vindicate ourselves. So our trust is in him, that he will exercise justice on our behalf. We don't have to do it ourselves. Praise Yahuah. Halal Yahuah. The one who says we must not make mighty ones other than him, that's the one that we need to move to and transition into his reign and in his kingdom. Separation, obviously, as I said, is never easy. We were born into this world that operates this way. That's all we know. Now you say you are going to operate against everybody else, against the tide, against what everyone else is doing. It's funny that people claim that the jobs or businesses that they have is from Yah, yet they are not happy. It's very, very important that we actually you meditate on this thing, because a lot of people, they spend so much time in their workplace, at their workplaces. They spend so much time in their businesses that they don't even have time with Yahuah. And they don't even have time with their own families. And they work so hard, and they are not being recognized even for the work that they do. They fight, they're not at peace at all. And now, how then do you then say that that particular job or that particular business comes from Yah, when the word tells us that the blessings of Yahuah maketh rich and he adds no sorrow to it? But if you are sorrowful, if you are always, when you have to wake up, you're like, oh, not again. You look forward to weekend, you look forward to taking time off and so forth. How then is that from Yahuah? It's not from him. It is something I used to discuss this when I was in corporate with my friends. Most of them, they said if they had an alternative, either through marrying rich husbands or coming from rich family with great inheritance, they wouldn't be working. And that's a lot of people that wouldn't work. We see it with some cultures, particularly in the Afrikaans cultures. The man is the one that's working, and women will be housewives, taking care of the children. But all this has turned around because of the need, not out of a desire, a need for money, to be able to meet the requirement, the expenses and so forth. So money has become a mighty one. Money has become a source of provision, which Yahuah reminds us that in the first commandment, do not have mighty ones other than me. Do not have sources other than me. Another thing that we also look at, when people claim that the jobs that they have is coming from Yahuah, you find that they not even have money to even offer to the kingdom. Yes, they've worked and they're like, yo, praise Yah, I've got a job, Bazalane, I asked for prayers, now I've got a job, I'm happy. But you can't even offer to the work of the kingdom. You can't. You can't, because as soon as that money comes, you already have hands lining up for that money. Those hands lining up, including medical aid, including insurance. There's so many insurance, especially here in South Africa, I don't know in other countries. Insurance for the car, insurance for the house, insurance for your DST dish, that should it be struck by lightning, insurance for your phone, insurance for your dogs, just everything. There is so much insurance that is out there. You've got school fees, like we say, it's kuningi. There's just so many things. You still have to have petrol or to go to work, which constantly increase. You still have to do groceries, you still have to wear clothes and be decent when you go to work. When it comes that money, it basically just revolves. You were already on a negative, a maximum negative, a maximum overdraft when the 25th, those that gets paid on the 25th of the month or the 15th of the month or the 30th of whichever date that you get paid, you're already at the maximum of overdraft. You've used all the credit cards. How could that be from Yah? How could that life be from Yah? So when that salary comes, it just reverses that negative, it be positive, and then you start again. First day of the month, you're starting on the negative, and then you increase your negative until you get to a maximum. How could you call that life? That's not life. Yahuah said, I came that you may have life, that you may have life abundantly. That's not even life. It's not, you were promised abundant life. Abundant means you can be able to take care of someone else, not just the work of the kingdom. Even in the olden times of our forefathers, when they were still planting, they were told that when they reap, when it's time for harvest, they must leave something on the edges for the strangers, for the poor people, and leave them and give it to them. Not eat everything that you cannot even help someone who knocks at the door and say, I need help. You cannot even make any contribution towards orphanages and help any strangers. You can't even help yourself. How are you going to help anyone else? Can you call that life? How do you call that a blessing and say, Bazalwane, let's praise Yah, I found a job. Oh no, some people even ask from us, I'm going to be paid in 2-3 days, but I've run out of petrol money or travel fare. I'll repay you as soon as I get paid. I don't know what loan sharks is in English. I think it's called loan shark, because the bank cannot even loan you anymore. You are blacklisted. So then you go to these loan sharks or mashonisa that's gonna hold your card, your bank card, and your ID. How could you then say that this is Yahuah's blessing, that the job that you have, Yahuah has given you? If he really gave you that job, why wouldn't you want you to take from that job, that business? Because it's not only applying to business, to jobs. I used to think that people that are living this kind of slavery people in the workplace, as in employees. No. Yes, from employment it moves from the juniorest of all of them all to even the seniors, the directors. I know the last person I had in corporate was a group CEO. Even at that level, they living on debt. From the as bottom as the cleaner, office cleaner. Then even with the way running your own business, you must suck up to people for your contracts to be signed. You must suck up to people for your invoice to be paid. You must suck up to people to entertain them, to smile at them even if you don't want to smile at them, to cut corners, and so many other things that are against your belief, your values, your ethics. Because if you don't, how are you going to be able to pay school fees? How are you going to be able to pay all this insurance, and including medical aid, which is an insurance, by the way, it's a health insurance, and so many others, if you're not getting your invoice processed in time and paid? So either way, it's just the different side of the corner. So even those that run their own businesses, if that that business can be a mighty one, just as the employer or the employment is a mighty one. So these are the things that we need to be careful of in terms of the statements that we make. When you say, Yah has blessed me, I have this job, you are living from paycheck to paycheck, and you cannot even offer to his own kingdom. When the word talks about that the Leviticus, that the offering that came into the house of Yahuah, they were to eat from it as they are serving in the house of Yahuah. But that in this particular day and age, it's every man for himself. And that's why I still see the value of it in being able to go to Yahuah and say, yeah, your word says I must trust you. Your word says I must look up to you, not depend on offerings from the church members, not depend on tithes from the church members, because they're going to end up controlling you, what you must preach, what you must not preach, that you must not offend them, that you must not speak out when they are not living a separated life, when they are not conducting themselves according to the word. Because they're going to say, oh, now you talk too much, then they're going to put brakes on their tithes and offering. And now you've become their servant. You're no longer serving Yah, you're serving them, you're pleasing them so that they can keep on, have not moved to other churches or keep on offering and giving tithes. Either way, whether it's in the setup of an assembly or a church or employment or a business, Yahuah must be our source and the only source. If we read the book of Romans chapter 13 verse 8, it says, Yahuah says, owe no man anything except to love each other. So if we're instructed to owe no man, according to the book of Romans chapter 13 verse 8, which Yahuah instructs us that we must not owe no one anything except to love each other, how come we have so many debts? A house bond, even the whole term, it says you're in bondage. It's a bond. Yeah, that's why it's called a house bond. You owe that money, that house that you live in, you don't owe it until you paid over 20 years with whatever interest that you would have paid after 20 years. The car that you're driving, you also got it on debt. The petrol in that car, you're using a credit card to fill the petrol. The food that you eat, you use a credit card to go to Woolies or Pick and Pay or Checkers, whichever grocery shop, you use this credit card to buy food. You go, the clothes that you wear, you go to the shops, whatever shops, clothing shop, you swipe the credit card to buy clothes. You are just dead from head to toe. That's not it. That's not a life. That's not the abundant life that Yahushua came to give us. And Proverbs chapter 22 verse 7, it tells us that the borrower is a servant to the lender. So then you as a borrower, then you're going to be, you're constantly going to be a servant to the bank or whoever it is that you owe. Whereas Yahuah says we must not serve anyone but him. We must not be a servant to anyone but him. Now you have someone competing for the position of Yahuah, as in you are now a servant to the lender. As we close, we're going to read the scripture in the book of Matthew chapter 6 verse 24, or otherwise known as Matthew chapter 6 verse 24. It reads, no one can serve two masters, for either he shall hate the one and love the other, or else he shall cleave to the one and despise the other. You are not able to serve Yahuah and riches. You are not able, no one is able to serve Yahuah and riches. There is no if, there is no buts, there's not I can balance the two, I can measure the two. There is no such thing. Yahuah does not lie. He's not a man that he should lie. When he says that no man, no one can serve two adunim, or no one can serve two masters, he means it. He says you are not able to serve him and riches. And remember, riches, as we defined it earlier in Mark chapter 10 verse 23 to 24, it doesn't necessarily speak to wealth, but it speaks to even things that you need for livelihood. And we'll see this as we continue in this verse. Verse 25. Verse 24 of Matthew chapter 6 says that you are not able to serve Yahuah and riches. Then verse 25 clarifies what riches are. Yahuah is so clear. I don't know why people confuse him, why people confuse his word and says it doesn't mean this, it means that. What he says, what he means. What he says, is what he means. It's no such, you shouldn't be that in the dark and like, I don't understand, what does this mean? Verse 25 of Matthew chapter 6, it says, because of this, because of what? Because you cannot serve Yahuah and riches. Because of what? Because you cannot have two masters. Because the word because, it's a joining statement. Nobody just come and say because. Because what? They must have said something before. In verse 24, he said, you are not able to serve him and riches. You are not. Verse 25, then he says, because of this, I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, or about your body, what you shall put on. Is not life more than the food, and the body more than the clothing? Now, verse 25 then clarifies that riches is not speaking only about wealth, or being rich does not only speak about being wealthy. It speaks of necessities. Hence, it says, because of this, I say to you, do not worry about your life. What life? Posh? No, I'm not even dreaming about posh. I'm not even dreaming about a holiday. I'm just wanting the basics. Basics such as the food that I eat, the drink, and the clothes I put on my back, on my body. That's what verse when it speaks to riches it speaks of the necessities, the needs that we have, that we should not worry about them. Money then is a mighty one, not necessarily in the form of riches or wealth, because it's what we use to get the basics that I spoke about. So we're going to conclude with this very, very important statement. Even if you've forgotten everything else that I said in this teaching, please take note and take very good note of this last statement in conclusion. In Egypt, Israel were in forced labor. They were in forced labor later, obviously, because initially they were promised money. We went through that teaching in the book of Yahuah, that they were lured into working and being paid money, but afterward they didn't pay them. But the form of compensation that they were having was basically, now you are citizens, and I'm putting under inverted commas, you are citizens, you live in our country, that you can be able to plant and have some cattle in this land. So that's how you are compensated. You are able to live, you are able to have livelihood. We are providing for you here in Egypt, and that's why we're putting you in bondage. In return, we are compensating you for the livelihood that you are getting by being a citizen of Egypt. So they were in bondage, they were in forced labor, being compensated for living in the country and being able to have land and plow on it and have cattle and so forth. So Egypt, being the house of bondage, was a mighty one for them, was a mighty one to Israel, as in source of provision. And that's why Yahuah had to come and say, let my people go so they can serve me. Why? Because no man can serve two masters. You cannot serve the Egyptians and serve me at the same time. Israel is my firstborn. Let them go so that they can serve me. So the comparison that we see between Egypt, otherwise known as Mithrim, and Babel, is that in Egypt they were in forced labor but compensated by partaking in the economy of Egypt, as living in Egypt. That was breaking the first commandment, because Egypt became a mighty one before Yahuah to them, beside Yahuah to them, other than Yahuah to them. Now let's look at another comparison, Babel. In Babel, they were forced to worship a golden image which Nebuchadnezzar built, and we find this in the book of Daniel chapter 3 from verse 1 to verse 7. Nebuchadnezzar built this golden image and forced everyone to worship it, as found in Daniel chapter 3 from verse 1 to verse 7. So Daniel was representing breaking of the breaking of the second commandment, in that there is this image that they're to bow down and worship it. Babel, they are breaking the second commandment, worshipping, bowing down to a carved image. Egypt, also breaking the first commandment in this case, as in having Egypt as a mighty one. But Yahuah has delivered us from both Egypt. Yahuah has delivered us from both Mizraim, which is the house of bondage, and he has delivered us also from Babel. And he says, flee Babel. He says, come out of her, my people, lest you partake of the suffering. That you, when I punish Babel, when I destroy Babel, you must not be in there, because you're going to be part of it if you have not fled Babel. So we have to run for our lives, run from Egypt, run from Babel, run unto him. Very conniving about Babel, by the way, is that when they were released after 70 years of being in the physical Babel, as initially ruled by Nebuchadnezzar or captured by Nebuchadnezzar, when they were released later on after 70 years, they were given an option whether they can go back to their land, Yisrael, or they can remain in Babel. Majority of them, by the way, chose to remain in Babel. Majority chose to remain in Babel. It is still the case in our times. Yahushua has delivered us. Yah is deliverer. Yahuah has delivered us through his son, Yahushua, from the bondage of sin and death, from the captivity of Egypt and Babel. But it is up to us to flee. Nobody's holding us. Choose right now to flee Babel and flee Egypt. Shalom.